If you're like me, you've been reading MM romances non-stop since going on TikTok and haven't been able to get out of a reading slump since reading the book series we shall not name.
I wish I knew how to quit you. Why don't you just let me be, huh?
But boy, do I have a solution for you. A new YA fantasy 2B trilogy. Let me give you the rundown. This guy, Will, is a predestined boy savior on the run since his mother's murder. Being hunted down by Lord Simon, aka Lord Crenshaw, the man who wants to usher in the Dark King's new reign. Put a pin in that. Will is given refuge in the Steward Citadel. Put a pin in that. Where he goes through magical hero puberty, training to bring down the Dark King for when the time comes. Will cannot do this alone. Violet must become Will's sword and shield and protect his back. Cyprian, the arrogant steward trainee, must learn to swallow his pride and help Violet and Will in their darkest time. Catherine, a lady in higher society who wants nothing more than to escape her restricted lifestyle and run off into the sunset with Will because he is dashingly Byronic, which I have to agree, seeing the trading cards. I am starved for fan art! But she can't admit it to herself because safety. And Catherine's 10-year-old sister, Elizabeth, serving sass and thick eyebrows for days. That is our main cast. Sounds pretty straightforward, right? Oh, you couldn't be more wrong. This story is anything but straight. But the gay wizards part really doesn't come through this yet. This is enemies to lovers slow burn, so forewarning. Now, who are the stewards and who is the Dark King, you ask? Well, here's the law. Long ago, before 1820s London, which I forgot to mention is the time we're set in, there was an ancient world of magic. The Dark King grew in power and waged war and tore down cities, and heroes tried and failed to stop him. Except one. The lady who the Dark King was in love with. This just gets more juicier and dramatic by the minute. But she killed him, whom Will is a descendant of. So I completely forgot to mention the stewards and what they are. The stewards are basically an ancient order of knights who are tasked with protecting the world from the Dark King, and their whole lives are dedicated to this. They're cut off from the outside world. They help Will train to get better and prepare for that time. Got that? Great, let's move on. This just feels like it's a lot to unpack, so I had to just give you all the spark notes. Why should you read this book? There is nothing like two enemies hunting each other down. But in this case, it's James hunting Will. So James! Who is James? Editing Sydney here, but I just wanted to highlight this line because it just sums up James perfectly. Through the doorway, strolling in elegantly over trash, was James. He is one of Simon's men, who is devastatingly beautiful. He was beautiful, a golden beauty. He might have been carved from fine marble by some master, but there was no one in the world who looked like this. And then describing James's face, that was like nothing else left on this earth. Are you kidding me? Really? How am I supposed to hate this villain if he's devastatingly beautiful? What I really loved is when Will and James see each other, the world disappears. And that's not a joke. They are that intensely drawn to each other without knowing why. Why are they so familiar to each other? This feeling, this connection. Will could feel something happening, like words whispering, I will find you, I will always find you. Like a metal gauntlet closing around flesh. Try to run. He'd never forget the moment James's eyes had met his, the sensation of coming home, as though they knew each other. And this is James stepping onto the scene, and it says, everything faded. This world insignificant. James the only real thing in it. You. James's extraordinary beauty pressed in like a knife. It hurt. And this tension just simmers under the surface, which is... But I am happy to say Picard is still the queen of tension, although I have a feeling this tension's gonna get way more intense if you've read the book, if you've read the ending. Nothing said bad romance like that did. Oh. Subverting tropes. That is number 2. The last 70% of this book can be summarized in one sentence. Bitch, you thought! Bitch, you thought. Oh, it got dark. Dark like I wasn't expecting it to go dark. Now I have no idea where the hell this book is going, because everything this sets up, it also tears it down. Like I said, I was listening to Bad Romance on repeat once I finished this. It just felt right. Let's address the elephant in the room. The collar, the choker, encrusted with rubies. I didn't think she would pull this on us. I know it's like the most minor Captive Prince detail, but I can't help but link it because in what world does this... I'm so happy that I can get it off my chest because I've been dying to talk about it. First and foremost, the fact that this collar was only made for James, aka the Betrayer, aka the Night King, the Dark King's general and plaything. Like, this relationship is dark. I'm speechless. I just was not expecting to see something like that. A collar of all things. But knowing Picard, I trust her to make this a believable progression from enemies to reluctant allies to somewhat friends to friends back to enemies and so on and so forth. The Dark King has set all of this in motion, which is just unfortunate for James and Will as well. That's the other thing. Will, being the Dark King, was not expecting that. But towards the end, as things were not going the way that they had planned it, I was like, what direction is this story going in? What possible way are we going to defeat this Dark King? And then I realized, are we the villain? Is Will the villain? When you don't find your enemy, maybe you are the enemy, you know? But going back to that collar and the Captive Prince connotations, like, overall this story is not the same as Captive Prince. It doesn't feel that way. You know, as a Captive Prince fan, I'm gonna grab on to any tiny detail that I can because there's no more content for that series, and we all know that. It also makes me think that Picard likes to revisit certain things, and it's not quite connecting in my head what that is. No, that's it. It's basically, we have another lover, potential lover, I should say, who has an unknown identity and makes it quite angsty because it is somewhat dark and problematic. That, I think, is like on that same line in terms of it being related to Captain Prince. And I don't know where the hell that's gonna go. And that makes it so much more exciting. Is Will gonna turn into the Dark King, or is he gonna refrain from that? Because it's kind of ominous the way it ends. Like, the last thing Will says, I'll get it. Because there are comments throughout the book where you don't notice it when you're reading it at first, but then you go back and you're like, oh, this is actually quite ominous, quite sinister. In the last scene, James says, "I'm here to follow you." His eyes were bright, his lips smiling, his hair gold in the shifting light from the fire. Will said,
"Of course you are."
Because there's this constant balance and shifting of in a monologue in Will's head where it's like,
"I will find you. Try to run away."
When he sees James, but he's constantly lured by him. So it's very angsty and complicated. What I really liked was that Elizabeth, little 10-year-old Elizabeth, is the chosen one. That is so adorable, but also, what does that mean now? What happens to all the relationships that Will has built up with, like, Violet, Cyprian, Elizabeth? He can't exactly say, "Oh guys, I'm the Dark King," because Cyprian's gonna kill him. Like, all of this lore and history, I just want to know what happens. I have to know. But I also think to Violet, and how, like, Violet was initially a lion and how that was considered to be evil against the stewards because she's a part of the Dark King's men, or Simon's men. I think Picard does female characters just as well as she does her male characters, because there is this idea that when an author does something that they're not used to doing, that they're gonna be awkward at it. But I think she did Violet's character, Catherine's character, Elizabeth's character really well. Violet is described, and I think a few other characters, I suppose James as well, are described as being androgynous. And I think that really reflects Picard's feelings towards gender. I know it's not that obvious in this book because it's just something mentioned, but I think a little goes a long way, and I just like that because it gives it variety. Oh, actually, this was really unexpected, but I laughed in one scene because it just totally caught me off guard as to how that scene was going to end. And of course, I am talking about the unicorn. Devon or Devon, I have no idea. The unusual descriptions of him being disgustingly pale. I was like, why are we highlighting how pale he is? But then that scene came along with his POV change, and I was like, this is why. It makes sense now. The way that scene progresses, I was like, I mean, that's kind of awkward if he's been with Robert for like 10 years. And like the way it was progressing, I was like, do they have some sort of unlikely romantic relationship or intimate relationship of some kind? And I was thinking, this is kind of sweet because Robert's gone and he's found the horn, the one that got cut off from his head, and he gives it to Devon. Devon's like surprised at how nice this is, I think. But then he just straight up stabs him, and I was like, what the hell? I was not expecting to laugh, but I laughed so hard. That was the last thing I was expecting in that. But it also makes sense because Robert's technically someone who's been profiting off selling unicorn parts. He's basically a unicorn poacher. That's kind of fucked up, but anyway. I'm actually quite excited to see Devon. What role is he going to play? Because he seems to be wanting to follow the Dark King. He was an unlikely character that I kind of ended up loving. So that is my review of Dark Rise. If you want to discuss spoilers in the comments, please put a little spoiler warning beforehand and like space it out, because I wanted to make this as accessible as possible. But let me know your thoughts on Dark Rise. What are your predictions? I will be doing more Dark Rise content because I have the Rainbow Crate, I've done the reading vlog. If you have not checked those out already, whenever they come out, please do so. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Little blooper here, but does anyone else's paperbacks do this? I hate that. It's the plastic. They can see you.